Wondery Plus subscribers can listen to episodes of How Do You Cope early and ad-free. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Hello and welcome to the second episode of How Do You Cope with me, John Robbins. This is the podcast where I sit down with a range of guests to talk about the obstacles they have faced and to ask the simple question, how do you cope? My guest today is the musician, writer and presenter Jordan Stevens. Jordan is best known as one half of pop duo Rizzle Kicks, who shot into the spotlight as teenagers in the early 2010s. After years of making music together, growing up in Brighton, their old school and vibrant energy saw them rise to the top of the charts relatively instantaneously. Rizzle Kicks reformed recently after a 10-year hiatus, and they've just released a new album. Jordan's also pursued his own musical projects, acted and presented on TV and audio, and recently released his autobiography Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs. And you might be able to read between the lines of the title, ADHD has formed the backdrop of his life. In this chat, we talk about how Jordan self-medicated his ADHD for many years using drugs and alcohol before the breakdown of his relationship forced him to confront his demons and begin a journey of self-discovery which challenged his perceptions of love, masculinity, and how he viewed himself. Hello, welcome to the podcast, Jordan Stevens. Jordan, thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I was just saying to you before we started, I've been living in the world of your book for the last week. It's not a book that you could just pick up and read all the way through and then put down. I was finding I was having to stop and process stuff myself, which I think is a sign that it's really successful in what you've got across, because I was finding out as much about me as I was about you while I was reading it.
That's great.
And there's a danger we could go off in so many different areas. So I'm going to try and sort of stay focused to the remit of the podcast, which is how do you cope?
Sure.
But I wonder if I give a sort of thumbnail sketch of the story it covers, and then we can get into it. And I would say broad strokes, you were medicating trauma and ADHD with drugs and alcohol and sex.
Yeah.
And that led to an infidelity in your relationship, which I'm going to say caused a breakdown, which began a process of sort of self-discovery, understanding and healing, if that's a fair synopsis.
That's exactly that.
Of it.
Yeah, it's great.
So could we talk about Jordan before that event?
Yeah.
How did that Jordan cope, and what was he coping with?
So interestingly, one image that immediately comes to my mind when you say that was either my first or second ever therapy session, because I did actually start therapy before I had this, breakdown as a result of my own shortcomings. I had some sessions, and I remember my therapist, who we ended up working with each other for a couple of years and really, really helped me. She asked me if I wanted to go there. We sat down, we spoke a little bit, and she was like, look, anxiety is your petrol. This is what you run on. So do you want to take that apart? And I was like, yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's do it. I really understood why she kind of gave me that opportunity to potentially not, because it's tough. It was tough. And not only was I running on anxiety on a interpersonal level, so every day I was up, you know what I mean? Movement. I really, really struggled to be still, really struggled. It was just, and I didn't even identify it as a problem.
So what were you using in the years leading up to that therapy to cope with that inability to sit still and to sit with yourself?
So I wasn't combating it at all. If anything, I was accentuating it. It was just more, up, I couldn't go any more up. I just was very into uppers, amphetamines. But yeah, man, that was my vibe. Coffee, uppers. To be fair to me, I did have breaks, didn't drink as much every now and again. I started self-medicating for ADHD, which took me off harder drugs. But essentially, whenever I felt knocked, I had this cyclical appetite for self-destruction, which just kept biting me. And actually, this infidelity, in my mind, I was like, okay, this is too obvious now. There's a pattern of behaviour. I'm ruining every intimate relationship I've been in. It wasn't the first time I cheated, or I'd had some experience being cheated on when I was younger, but essentially I fell into that pattern and I was bored of it because some part of me knew that partnership was and intimacy was more important than just destruction and creation.
So let's start like very basic. What is ADHD?
So
you've been diagnosed twice, haven't you?
Yeah. Look, I mean,
which is quite ADHD.
When I first got diagnosed, ADHD wasn't this hot button. You know, it feels, some people I think even frown at the phrase now because everybody and their mums is ADHD, which I think is mostly true. And then also as a result of the fact, I think people are developing ADHD. I think the world is moving at an incredibly rapid rate. It feels like a natural consequence of that. When you have every single option possible, when you're getting delivered news every 2 seconds of the day, every 2 minutes of the day, just boom, boom, alert, text message, film, don't want to watch that, change film, song, don't like that, change song. Of course, you're going to struggle to be like, this is what I want to do, you know? So, when I first got diagnosed, I didn't take it very seriously. I was at school. I just got put in a room of kids who also had ADHD and some dyslexic kids too. And I was allowed to stand up in exams. But I still missed all my targets in exams because I hated and still hate exams, don't agree with them. And then I became a fucking, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
I became a fucking pop star at 19. And like, why would I care about ADHD if I was a pop star? I just drank loads of Lucozade, ate loads of Snickers, ate what I wanted, didn't understand nutrition at that time. And then I also had all this social currency and temporary power, I guess. And I was just loving life and being a fucking idiot.
So for someone who might be, you know, hearing the phrase ADHD and thinking, God, what is this bloody thing? Everyone's
Sorry, I should explain that. Yeah, I didn't.
Talk us through some of the symptoms.
Such an ADHD thing. You actually just asked me that. You just asked me that and I didn't even respond. Okay, Jordan, switch on. Okay. ADHD, right. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. From what I understand, one of my favourite physicians who talks a lot about this is Gabor Mate. He's an incredible man. And he believes that people are born with a propensity to have ADHD, but it's also influenced by our environment. People who talk about being born with ADHD speak of the neurons in our brain, underfiring to the executive functioning part of the brain, the part of our brain where our thoughts are organized. You know, so plans are organized, space is organized. We underfire, which is why it's almost confusing that the medication for hyperactivity is speed, because you're actually speeding up the neurons to hit that part, and then it sends the message to our body to calm down. And yeah, so that's mainly what it affects: organizing thoughts, organizing the day. Time blindness is a thing. In fact, I've heard ADHD described as time blindness, which I find fascinating. There's a lot of object permanence, kind of not remembering somebody or something is there unless you're literally looking at it, unless it's mentioned. And then there's this hyperfocus, which is being almost unable to let go of a thing. And in my experience, that can be really tough because I can hyperfocus on thoughts or opinions. I'm getting better because there are definitely ways to cope with ADHD, which is great. For me, it's mainly exercise, nutrition, just making sure that my self-esteem as well is in a decent space. Make sure the people around me I can trust. Also, I think what RSD I learned about recently, which is rejection sensitivity disorder, which, again, people might turn their nose up. I don't know. But when I heard about it, it's interesting. It makes sense because no one likes rejection. But I would say, from my understanding, that my response to rejection and other people who consider themselves ADHD or have been diagnosed, their response to rejection is noticeably extreme sometimes.
I'm going to stick a pin in the rejection thing. We're going to come back to it. Right, I want to talk about the moment that sort of led you to this crisis, which is an infidelity which ended your relationship. And the way you describe it as a reader, as a male reader especially, I think, is really interesting because it's honest and you don't just paint yourself as like, it's not a story about a bad person becoming a good person.
No.
It's a story about a bad and good person learning that they have to nurture both the bad and good side of themselves.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that you were in therapy before this happened, because I think therapy gives us an understanding of ourselves. It gives us a terminology to describe what's up with us. but we can also use those terms to manipulate other people.
Sure.
And that's definitely something you talk about. So my question is, what's the difference between being self-destructive and being an asshole?
An arsehole, I guess, insinuates that the self-destruction is affecting someone else, right?
Yeah.
I think somebody can self-destruct and not affect others. I think you become an arsehole if that self-destruction extends outwards and you don't do anything about it. And that, unfortunately, is common because it's hard. It's hard when you're not able to balance yourself. What's so heartbreaking about the human condition and how we grow unconsciously is that we often create the conditions that we most fear. And that's terrifying.
The way you describe that situation where you're being honest with your girlfriend, you're saying, look, I've messed up. How can we move through this? You do something, or you explore something I know I've experienced in my life, which is you fess up to doing something wrong and you immediately want to be forgiven.
Yeah.
And you then feel their lack of willingness to forgive you as like a sort of slight on you.
Issue, yeah.
So this sort of tug of war begins between your guilt and you're like, but can we get to the bit where everything's okay again?
I know.
So could you talk to us about that? Because it's really it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I guess, admitting to doing something wrong, in my mind at least, I'm a very big fan of truth. I know it sounds kind of bizarre out of context, but I'm really appreciative of somebody being honest is a better way to put it. Honesty is a really important value for me. So, I have my perception of honesty and then I have another person's perception of honesty. And yeah, the reality is another person's response is out of my control. And that's all very egoic. The ego is about control, naturally. We've all got that to contend with. And that breakup, being told, that I'm not, no longer wanted, that's a grief. There's stages to grief. Denial is a huge one. And so I wanted to be honest that I really did try and intellectually put myself in a position where I felt like I wasn't a bad person. I wasn't, because I was terrified. I was terrified of not being able to worm my way out of something. I felt up until that point, I had a way with words. I could sweet talk people. Just to put it into a slightly different context, which I don't mention in the book, I'd had one attempt at being a successful musician, and it worked, So it completely skewed my ideas of how the world works. And I really believe this humbled me massively, This person was like, no, fuck off.
Yeah, there's a line where you're talking to your partner, and it's a really good example of how we can weaponize therapy speak. We can use those terms to be manipulative to sort of get what we want. And you say to her, I wasn't trying to hurt you, I was trying to hurt myself, which can both be true and also useless to her.
Yeah, because she's still been hurt.
As if someone in that situation is going to turn around and go, oh, I'm so sorry, cheating on me must have been really difficult for you.
Yeah, I know, mad.
But it's really important to have that.
I wanted that in, yeah. Yeah, of course, I wanted that in. It's funny because there's other, that particular moment where I was, pleading that it had nothing to do with her almost. I wanted to put that in there because I genuinely, that's where my head was at. I really, truly couldn't possibly conceive of the idea that someone would take that personally, in spite of me breaking an agreement. I was playing I can't, I do this all the time. It's the worst part of me. I had this twisted idea that if someone was to accept me and embrace me at my lowest point, then I would be in this forever debt, regardless of how they felt. And it's delusional. It truly was. Actually, though, in terms of therapists speak, interestingly, I didn't tell my therapist that I had cheated. That was one of the things that she was most confused about, because suddenly I think, I ran away to Brazil and then just hit her up yo, I need to do therapy 3 times a week. But, she said to me, why didn't you tell me? I don't know. And I think honestly, before that point, I might have been lying a little bit in therapy. I might not have really been understanding what it was that I could do in there. I definitely didn't think it was a safe space because I didn't tell my therapist what I'd done.
So what do you think, looking back now, your fear was of telling your therapist about the situation you're going through?
That she would think I was a bad person.
Yeah.
took a long time for me to remove whatever projection I put onto my therapist. That's huge. This fear of being judged, massive. Took me a long while to get out of that in therapy.
Sort of the framing of the whole journey you go on is a journey of acceptance that there is good and bad in all of us.
Yeah.
And I think what's amazing about the sort of fallout of your girlfriend going, actually, no, I'm not going to let you off the hook here. Not only that, I'm not going to speak to you. I'm not going to make you feel better. Is that you have to grapple with this, am I a bad person? And you show how it's important in those moments of crisis. You can either double down on your behaviour and lose yourself in more drugs, more alcohol, more sex.
Definitely.
Or you can go, okay, I need to like explore the world of myself.
Yeah.
And like I could give a quick list of some of the stuff you tried, which was a healing, ceremony in Brazil, acupuncture, therapy, ADHD medication, a retreat, letter writing, articles, gym, sobriety.
Yeah.
All of these things, it's really important to go, right, I'm open to this now.
Yeah.
So could you talk about your headspace in those sort of months when there was no contact with your ex and some of the things that you just tried, even in the midst of that sort of madness?
I'd never felt that low before, and it scared me. And I do think in hindsight, I also made decisions that at the time appeared good, but actually might have been a little bit impulsive. Shout out my ADHD. But, with my sobriety, that was a good idea. But I think coming off of ADHD medication immediately after a breakup was kind of wild. If I think back, a lot of people taper off medication anyway. So I had this like lack of dopamine, and it was a real. I say this in my book. I feel my toes. I remember feeling my toes the day after the breakup or 2 days after, and I was just like, I've not been in my body. I've not felt my body in years. So I was dealing with all these things at the same time, and in those initial months, my grand passing was one of the first griefs I was confronted with immediately. I was, I've not even thought about how much that hurt me, and I miss her. And so I was shocked. I felt like, why has no one told me? Why can nobody fix this? That was another desire. How can I fix this? What can I take? What can I eat? What can I do? But fortunately for me, for whatever reason, and maybe it is oddly, wanting to prove a point in some odd way. Initially, I hope I've moved past that now. But I thought I need to find balance, and those were the options that were around me. I've always been interested in spirituality. I've always been interested in alternative methods of healing. I don't think we have a great grasp on emotional well-being in our society, but that's what I wanted to do. I knew I had to stay fit. I knew I had to try and eat. Obviously, I was struggling to eat, as everyone I think does when they're heartbroken. And I ran away thinking that was a really unique and cool thing to do. Actually, a lot of people, if they can afford it, will run away. I went and spent time with my uncle, and he happened to be part of a Afro-Brazilian kind of religious setup, candomblé. I really wanted to just not feel like I was losing it, and that's hard. And the reality is, it's time.
So you patch that leak of booze and coke, which anyone who's ever stopped, an addictive substance will know, means you're suddenly left with just all the reasons why you did it.
Yeah, literally.
All those emotions,
which
can feel like quite chaotic in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But you begin to seek out more sort of nourishing practices for dealing with those emotions. But all the while, you're still going nuts about your ex, like social media, chatting to friends. Have they spoken to her? Has she seen this thing I've put up online?
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about how social media, what role that played in your mental health in that time.
It's the worst. Listen, it's the worst. Anybody going through a breakup will know how damaging that aspect is. Of course, I had a friend who was just like, you have to block, move, delete the number. But it took me so long to realize that was what I was needing to do was take myself away from the situation. I really had convinced myself that I was trying to win this person back. This thing called the bridge that I did, this emotional trauma retreat, that was really what taught me that I was really trying to find a connection with myself, not trying to rekindle a connection with somebody I'd wronged. The online, the connectivity we have is just it's a constant re-traumatizing, because, you know, if people haven't been able to heal themselves away from something.
And I wonder if a really important part of that retreat you mentioned, the bridge, was the fact that you turned your phone off for a week.
Yeah, massive.
Could you talk about what happened on that retreat? Because it was really, what's the word I'm looking for?
It was life-changing.
Yeah, life-changing.
It was life-changing. The bridge, unfortunately, it doesn't run anymore. Hopefully one day we'll start again, but it's run by 3 women, Donna, Gabby and Freddie. Donna Lancaster, somebody I'm still incredibly close to. She actually approached me because she was running this course and not many men would sign up for it. On my week, there was, I think, 14 people there, and there was me and one other guy. Ultimately, those 3 women have been through 20 plus years of psychiatric training in various disciplines, inner child work, you know, I guess Rogerian therapy, Freudian therapy, all the different types of therapy, also bringing spirituality in it, movement therapy, shaking, you know, they're just all these different methods put into this 6 days, which is essentially loosening a person up to be able to then have a trauma response at the end of the week when reading out 2 letters to whoever. So I think it's called family constellation therapy is the thing. And it's really intense. And I came away from it with a newfound understanding, which seems, I don't know if it seems obvious. I preach about this all the time now. I literally preach about it, that I was like, wow, emotion is a physical reality that lives in my body. You know, this isn't a thing of, it's not a choice. This is what blows my mind. And maybe I believed that. Maybe I believed that I could just store and bottle everything up. But it was for me specifically, it was in my knee. And I was having these trauma responses. My knee was, you know, I had all this, I guess, angst and cortisol and anxiety and heartbreak was all stored in these pockets. And I suddenly wondered, is this why people grow up and have, you know, their backs hurt and their shoulders hurt? And, you know, I think because we harbor all this stress. And this was just a whole build up to try and release that and come to terms with the fact that we really miss people, and grief is so powerful. And then you finish this course as a group, feeling like I've known these people for my whole life. And it was transformative. I felt actually lighter. And now this is why I feel so passionately about every human being being encouraged to learn how to feel, because it's like, what I can't think of anything more useful than that.
So could you give a couple of examples of the kind of exercises you were doing in order to learn how to feel?
Loosen up? Yeah. So, I mean, look, writing is always a powerful tool. So if somebody struggles to write, there's always a encouragement to write at the end of each particular little section we were doing. And one of the hardest things, which people might find interesting, is there are people in this world who we consider caretakers, and I'm one of those people. And that isn't, again, there's no moral standing for that. It's just when somebody's sad, they themselves take on that sadness and feel like they want to stop that. One of the main rules on the bridge, which I found fascinating, is if somebody is upset, you leave them alone. And it's actually a rule, because if you step in, hand on the shoulder, hug, are you okay? You've taken them out of the experience, and you've actually made it more about the two of you. Which is fascinating. So that was a big challenge to not.
So people are getting upset because they're sharing stories from their past, or
as the week goes on, you know, there's certain things, you know, thinking about old relationships. We start the week by writing a grief chart, you know, and we draw these lines in our lives, and the longer the line, the heavier the grief felt for us, you know. So it'd be like losing a grandma, losing a pet, ending a relationship, you know. For me, even, it was loss of anonymity in regards to fame. That is a grief, you know. It might not be as widely relatable, but it really is a thing. You know, you are a different person now. So from the jump, and we put these rocks at the beginning of the week into these big pots, and that's us, you know, putting our grief together. But so yeah, eating well, going for walks alone, not intervening in people processing their emotions. Shaking is a really incredible one. So for example, if anybody owns a dog, you'll know that if something freaks them out, they just shake. And it's not just dogs. Pretty much any animal does it. Zebras, antelopes. You watch David Attenborough's a lot trying to escape lions, and then they're like, you know, because that is an animal naturally shaking the cortisol out of their system. We don't do that. So that's heavily encouraged, you know, to shake in the morning, shake how we're feeling, just to reset up our nervous system.
We do that, because I was just thinking when you say that, I was imagining, like, you know, when you pass a car crash and you see people sat on the sort of reservation while the sort of police are there, in shock with like a blanket around them. And I was thinking, people in those sort of extreme moments of shock,
your body's shaking,
You just can't stop shaking. So I guess that we understand that these physical reactions to emotional situations
the body
happen.
does. The body does,
But we then forget about them outside of those crises.
Well, I think those crises are we're just, our mind is just put into freeze, so our body takes over. But I think if our body had its way, we would be doing that. So yeah, shaking is another thing. Screaming eventually into pillows, again, you know, it almost seems a bit classic, a bit cliche, but it works.
Well, also it's doing something intentionally, which the body does automatically in moments of high stress. So people do scream.
Yeah. So yeah, and yoga, again, you know, yoga is incredible just because stretching and breathing, funnily enough, is, again, you know, an ancient tool that we somehow managed to move ourselves away. I don't even want to call it yoga, just literally stretching and breathing.
So at the end of this retreat, you talk about how you write 2 letters, and while you're reading these letters out, you have this trauma response. Your body starts doing things you're not telling it to do.
Yeah.
Talk us just through that process, but also about how it has stayed with you in any way afterwards. What change did that bring about in you?
So from my experience as a man, young man, I believe there was some conditioning, you know, in and around focusing on thought and rationale, mind, thinking patterns, answers, fixes, you know. And one of the most challenging aspects of my development into becoming a man is realizing that emotion often is not controlled by what I think, you know, what I actively think. And I know this because I've had experiences like these trauma releases, which genuinely, I can already picture men in my life who I love and adore, who are brilliant. This is so far from anything that we've been encouraged to understand or learn. You know, in our minds, feeling bad, do something about it. Feeling that, you know what I mean? It's about fixes. By the 6th day, we have more of a relationship with our bodies. Of course, we've stayed away from screens. You know, we're really in a place of openness. And there's a structure. I wish I knew the name of it, but there's a structure in how you're supposed to write these letters. There's obviously, you need to write it to a person that has that you have potentially like unresolved stuff with. But this structure is fascinating, and I remember this so vividly. You know, you're looking at this scaffolding, this structure, and you're writing, and I'm like, yeah, and this and that, and you're told, you know, no holds barred. You know, they're never going to see this. You read this letter out, you burn it. This is for you and the group only. You know, I'm writing this, yeah. And I remember I was like viciously writing this letter and getting out all my feelings and da-da-da-da. And then I just had this moment where I wrote this one sentence, and I vividly remember before going there, before reading it out, I remember when writing it that I didn't think anything about the sentence. I wish I could. I hope people listening can understand what I mean. It just happened. I just wrote this sentence, and then I carried on and da-da-da, and then this is what I really think. And then what happens is you sit down, and the facilitator is sat in front like we are now, and they are the person, right?
So they're sort of playing the role.
Yeah, they're playing the role of the person. Yeah, and they are trained. And this is the bit this is the killer part. This is even before I didn't actually get this far, but they also trained to provoke you into delving further into it. Because essentially, if this sometimes the person you're writing to isn't alive. It could be a totally unresolved thing. You know, so you've had an argument and someone's died, and then they go, you know, well, why didn't you tell me you were sorry? Like deep stuff. Just so you can feed it, because we shouldn't be afraid of that. Like, so maybe someone feels a regret that is killing them. I should have said I'm sorry, you know? For me, these, obviously, my mum and dad are, well, not obviously, but my mum and dad are alive. So I'm reading this out, and I got to this line. Yeah, it would actually make me emotional even thinking about it, but I got to this line, and I couldn't talk, I couldn't speak. And it was this line that I remember not thinking about. I thought it was a throwaway line. And I was like, And I remember the facilitator asking me questions, but why did you feel like that? But what did it? And I couldn't talk. I had lost the ability to talk. And my knee started fucking going, shaking. And she asked questions, and then there was a point where she went, okay, let's gently pick Jordan up, because I was just gone. I was shaking, I was crying uncontrollably. And they took me to a corner of the room, and they just put me in a blanket and just left me in a really loving way. And that was what it was for. But my God. In fact, I know it would have been my mum, that letter, I think. And then I actually had a second one with my dad. And I mentioned that in the book, that after this response, I felt so much lighter. I was suddenly like, whoa, that was incredible. And I'd asked Gabby to explain to me what had happened. And she went, this is what it's about. And then I was like, oh yeah, I just don't know who I'm going to write the second letter to. She was like, are you sure you don't know who? I just can't possibly think who I'd want to write this letter to. And obviously I needed to write something to my dad, and silence had informed so much of our relationship, and naturally I had tried to mute whatever I was feeling. And then I did the second one to my dad, and that was another trauma response, but in a whole other space. And that was very physical, and I had to be physically held by everyone in the room, which is part of, it's a primal thing. It's difficult to explain, obviously, in this podcast, but yeah, I can't, it's group therapy to that extent is incredible. And there's a documentary called The Work, which explores this very similarly, but it's literally just men in a high security prison with prisoners who are serving sentences for wild things, and then 3 civilians. And that explores exactly the same engagement with deep suppressed feelings. And you see how it's expressed, and that's what I experienced, but on in a different space.
So after your body had been able to express that response, and I guess your mind and body had worked to write those words, how did you feel afterwards, like a couple of days or a couple of weeks? Did you notice a change?
Yeah. In the order of the bridge, that happens from that point. That's the big release. And then afterwards, it's all about integrating love into your experience. The actual next day, or maybe that was the second to last day. So the last day I found probably the hardest. That included being told lovely things by the group. Really tough. I really struggled being complimented, because I'm very good with new people. I can hold a conversation. I actually love new people and environments, but I do, I battle with this kind of low self-esteem, this constant humming of doubt, as I'm sure people do, but I guess maybe because of my demeanor, it doesn't seem as obvious. So being sat there and being told all these really lovely things from people in the group was, oh my God, so hard. But we left the bridge after that. Dude, I promise you, I felt literally 2 stone lighter. Like 2 stone. I was just dancing all the time. It sounds cliche, but I genuinely felt free and more in myself and more confident. And, the corresponding years, obviously maintained therapy. So I managed to, I think, carve out much more sturdy relationships with my parents as a result.
And other conscious things you do now before approaching, say, a potentially traumatic situation, or when you feel that, what's the acronym RSD? What is that?
Oh, rejection sensitivity disorder.
Let me say that again. What does that initialism RSD stand for again?
No, it is an acronym.
It's not an acronym, so sorry.
Oh, you've been a pedant. I love this.
An acronym is something you pronounce, for example, NASA, whereas an initialism is something you spell out,
so that'd be like Rista.
RAC.
Well, I say Rista.
So, that's my brain.
I love that.
So what does the initialism RSD stand for again?
Rejection sensitivity disorder.
So let's say, because obviously that rejection from your girlfriend after the infidelity triggered this whole thing to kick off. Or certainly that's the perspective you get from reading your book. Say you feel that trigger now, you feel someone rejecting you or withholding love from you. Are you able to notice that, and do you have tools to deal with it? Or do you sort of spin out and think, oh, that's what that is?
Oh, I wasn't expecting the second part. Maybe the second part. I think prevention for me now is it's odd thinking in hindsight about the breakup with this newfound understanding of RSD, because I don't know. Like, I hear it and I think, yeah, okay, I get that. But to the same extent, I think I have also a crippling abandonment issue. I think many people do. I don't know if that's specifically tied to ADHD, but it hurts. And the fear of people, I think my thing specifically is, my biggest fear is that I'll say a thing, which is what literally happened. This is what's so wild. I've created the situation, see, unconsciously. Saying a thing and then a person I love disappearing. Like, my biggest fear. Something I've done. Like, I did something wrong and someone I love disappears. Like, and it's not even necessarily my ex. That's what's so wild. You know, she in that moment represented a fear that pre-existed her. So, like, I don't know who that original fear was. My therapist has some ideas, but you know, that thought pattern is embedded in my head already. So now I have an awareness, and so I can ask for things in my relationship, which I do. That's been a massive part of why my relationship works. Is I'm not too concerned. Well, I'm concerned about what I need to do for my partner to feel loved. But I now understand that I too need certain conditions in order to feel loved and appreciated. And I'm no longer worried about asking for that, because I trust my partner and I know that she wants the best for me. And that is a fucking blessing. And it doesn't happen all the time in relationships for two people to feel like they're on each other's team. And I made it very clear that if I didn't have these conditions, as it were, in which I could feel loved, I will start believing that she's not on my team. And then I'll start conspiring. And this is the beginning of the end, you know, and that is out of a fear. And I'll end up creating a situation that pushes her away, and then boom. And then the second part, sorry.
No, go for it.
Is that I had actually that experience of abandonment about 2.5 years ago with one of my best friends. And that was fascinating because it was in a very chill situation and I experienced myself spiraling. But this is a new world where I don't have drink, I don't have drugs. So what I don't know if I'm laughing out of sadness, but I just ate a lot of cake and I let myself do it. And I said to myself, I know exactly what's happening and I'm just going to let it be because I'm a fucking human being. I can't be on top of it all. But I had an argument with my friend. It was a heated debate. To them, just another day. I'm also a very heated debater, but I love this person. And they kind of left my house. I honestly don't think they would even have thought about this. But when he left, I just sat down on the sofa and was like, oh my God, that's the last time I'm ever going to see one of my best friends because I disagreed with him and he thinks I'm an awful person and I'm awful and why did I say that? And fuck, I've just lost someone. So I just ate loads of cake.
Whereas in the past you might have gone out and got hammered and
I would have gone out, started drinking, done a bunch of coke.
But you had the awareness, you knew what was going on. And you, even though like, yeah, sure, on the scale of things, eating cake isn't like the best coping mechanism, but it's like giving yourself permission to go, okay, you know what's happening emotionally, you know what's happening physically, cake's close to hand and it's going to get us through the next hour or so.
Literally. It was 2 days. And I knew and I remembered and I just went, look, let me just, I breathed through it and then it was cool, you know.
Will you give a really, let's end by talking about masculinity.
Yeah.
Because it's more towards the end of the book that you talk about this, but you give a really good example of a healthy exchange between you and your now girlfriend, right? Where you've said something or you've behaved in a way where she didn't feel particularly valued.
Yeah.
She goes very quiet on a phone call.
Yeah.
Hangs up the phone. You feel abandoned.
Yeah.
And that sort of triggers you. Now that is a situation every single person who's ever been in a relationship will know.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing can cause arguments. It can cause silences. It can cause, affairs. It can cause... That stuff gets way out of control.
Yeah.
But the you who's been all through various forms of, healing and therapy reacts to that situation really well because you call her back, you say, something's not right with this phone call. And she then is able to say, yeah, I felt you didn't give me the attention I needed.
Yeah.
And you then can accept that culpability but also say a boundary, which is, if that happens, I need you to tell me in the moment.
Yeah.
Because if you go quiet and hang up, I freak out.
Yeah. And tell me you love me.
And tell me, yeah. And it's such a healthy exchange.
Tiny little
And it may
thing.
sound like a very minor thing, but in the space of 30 seconds or a minute,
Yeah.
you together as a couple have gone from being on separate teams to being
To
on the same team.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, yeah, that's how to relate to people.
Yeah.
That for me sounds like a really healthy, well, it's not masculinity in a sense, but it's a man
Okay. Yeah.
who's been through a process teaching him how to feel and how to advocate for himself
Yeah.
and how to accept blame.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that man
Yeah.
and how he relates to other men now?
Yeah. So I do struggle a little bit struggle with the generalizing slightly, because I do think that there are so many other defining factors. You know, there are loads of things that define what a person is, but yeah, I am aware, of course, that the conditioning in our particular Western metropolitan society does allow for a man to lean into the idea that they don't need to engage with the emotional world. The isolation I see men experience, especially in their later years, and it makes me feel a little bit sad. And I think a lot of the shit that men do is always a projection. Every harmful act is a projection of self, you know. And if we are to believe that there are loads of situations where men are failing the people around them, one of the hardest things to recognize is that in itself is a reflection of how they feel. I didn't really understand what love was until my recent relationship, because I believe I entered it knowing that I deserved love, and then asking specifically for the type of love that I would like. And I'm not sure everybody has that understanding, that there is this calm and security that comes with a bond between two people. And I have this incredible experience where every moment and month and year with a person is this, you know, some people grow apart, but this, for me personally, at the moment, it feels that we're growing together, we're intertwining, we're learning, you know, we're preempting things for each other. It's just really, if I'm to step away from myself almost, it is just genuinely fascinating. And from somebody who I was so aloof for a lot of my 20s, and this understanding that I can feel calmer and I can focus on other things in my life that I enjoy, like writing, rather than where I can get the next fix. And I want men to understand that, you know, a lot of men will talk about commitment issues, and it always brings me back to this. I want to write about this, but there's this incredible, it must have been an answer in an interview that Joni Mitchell once gave. It just fucking stayed with me, man. And someone asked her about, what does she think about relationships? And she says, I'm obviously going to really paraphrase and butcher Joni Mitchell here, but she says something to the effect of, I spent a lot of my life having these flings with people, you know, these short-term affairs or relationships, and found I was meeting a version of myself that was the same, like a curated, carefully constructed idea of self I was presenting time and time again. I wasn't going anywhere. And she said the scariest and most rewarding aspect of being in a long-term relationship is you're actually meeting newer versions of you, not necessarily, not even just the other person. And that's harder than anything, you know, to see you know, fuck up and recover, that person fuck up and recover, forgive and forget and forget, you know, all these things, and then there's still this consistency. A lot of us haven't had that in our childhood, or perhaps have had a really bad relationship early on, and then these hearts just close, and there's this isolation and disconnection, and then it's covered in bravado and deflection. So I really believe that everyone should learn how to feel, because it will make them stronger and calmer and happier. And it never takes away from strength. It never takes away from all of the masculine ideals that we might want and need going forwards. It's literally, in my opinion, a gathering of resilience. And, you know, I find it baffling that we don't recognize the power of the emotional world more in society.
You wrote an article at the sort of the height of the social media Me Too movement. Yeah. And I think you wrote it while you were out in Brazil with your uncle.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
And that article went viral. Again, this is another bit of honesty, which I really love, is like part of your motivation for writing an article about how men need to sort of get to grips with their own behaviour was so that your ex would see it and take you back, which I loved.
Well, in my defence, I thought that after.
Yeah.
It was a hope, because I didn't, the thing that was so wild about that is I wrote it at a point where I was just, I had nothing. It's like that Ian Beale meme, I've got nothing left. I was just in Brazil sobbing every day in a car park, drinking 100 coffees and smoking 1,000 cigarettes. And I was just looking at these stories and being like, fuck, all right, there are degrees to this. So I just wrote this piece, and my uncle was like, that's really good. Sent it to my friend who's a journalist, and she was really helpful. She said, this is really good. And when it blew up, the thought entered my mind, maybe my ex will see and she'll think I'm really smart and lovely and open. But actually she was fuming, obviously. And so was, I guess, most people who had shared that intimate space and not had the best version of me.
Well, what I thought was interesting reading that article now, a few years hence, is I think my takeaway from Me Too was probably a bit warped. And it was like, right, there's a load of good guys and there's a load of bad guys.
Right.
So you better make sure you're a good guy. Uh-huh. And, if you've done anything bad, you've just got to feel awful about it for the rest of your life and never do it again. Mm. Whereas what I really liked from both your book and the article is there's a suggestion that actually by coming to terms with different parts of you that are good and bad and motivated by commendable things and regrettable things, then you can actually have a conversation with yourself about your behavior. So what do you see as being helpful things that men can do to improve, the world for everyone and to avoid terrible things happening? Because it does seem, I know there's that not all men thing, but it's often
a lot of men. Then I think we are, there could be changes in how we're socialized, and we're definitely going through a transitionary state. I mean, this kind of gender pecking order has existed for hundreds of years, and we're attempting to shift things, which is great. Especially again in our society, Western metropolitan society, there have been leaps and bounds for women and girls, which is fantastic, especially in terms of financial autonomy and creating capital. I think people keep dropping this stat, but I think we've just entered this time where women are actually out earning men in their 20s, which for the first time ever. And unfortunately, boys are failing at school globally, and that's a massive issue. And that's how you end up with charlatans online that can indoctrinate and radicalize people. But I actually think that what I want from men, and I think it's happening, I do. It's difficult to find positive angles because the really toxic men that are existing in really, really like all the cameras are there. It really seems overwhelming. And of course, there have been some horrendous cases recently where it's like numerous men. So I can understand very much that it feels like it's a man versus women thing. But, men still are overrepresented in terms of being unhoused. They are the most, I think it's like 97% of all deaths on the street are men. Like the schools don't accommodate our newfound knowledge of how boys' brains develop. And I just want the men who are great fathers, which there are many, and the men who are working in the communities to just make their voices heard, and for people like myself who are in positions of some kind of influence, to make sure that attention is put on to the care workers and the social workers and the community, the people who run charities, and there are men's spaces opening up all around the place. We have a responsibility to join these spaces and promote these spaces. I saw, a rapper I really loved did a whole song about his daughter and got like 10, 11 different dads with their kids in the videos. And I just love that. That, for me, that's a shift in culture. It might not be happening fast enough, but I try my best not to get too distracted by the horrendous shit that's coming out of some of these men's mouths, because I can see incredible men around me all the time, and I don't want them to be overshadowed by this. Capitalism breeds this immaturity. You're financially rewarded for being a psychopath in this culture. I'm not looking to these people for guidance, but I really think it's from the ground up. If we just keep celebrating the people who are doing the work. And it's my responsibility to tell people there are benefits to feeling okay. And that can even become financial. If everyone's so obsessed with earning money, well, make sure that you don't have a fucking mind-consuming relationship or a faulty this and that, make sure you can come home after work, breathe, have a lovely conversation with a person, and you'll feel better. So yeah, I think it's men's responsibility is to become more paternal, and not in a literal sense. Every boy and man should feel like someone that you can help and encourage. And also, it's our opportunity we have to criticize, of course.
Well, I
verbally criticize the men who aren't representative of true, authentic manhood.
I think it's really tricky because you're absolutely right that men are at the bottom of a lot of priority lists. The danger is you might take some of those stats and go, men are being discriminated against, and you use aggression. You sort of hit that with sort of like anger and trying to make up for that imbalance by dominating. But I still notice, even in quite well-meaning campaigns, that bad male behaviour is up to the women to police that. So I saw this thing at Christmas, a big billboard warning against drink spiking, date rape.
Yeah.
And basically the message was, watch your drinks this Christmas.
Yeah.
Because you might get spiked. And I thought, what in what world is that advert not don't rape people?
Yeah.
Don't spike someone's drink. So it was almost like, the onus is on women, because of course you're going to get your drink spiked and you're going to get raped. So you need to be pretty watchful.
Yeah.
What mechanisms can we use to change that message to don't act out?
I've seen it. Listen, I don't know if I can't remember if I've spoken about this, but my girlfriend was spiked in LA. It's one of the worst fucking things I've ever seen in my life. And I was so lucky I was there. We didn't realize, of course, until we got back to the hotel room, but I was up with her all night, and it was fucking horrible. It was such a horrible thing to see. And I just was like, how the fuck could any person do this? And again, because this is something I'm working on. The only thing that in my head is I'm like, I want to hurt the people who have got there. But of course that is, that might not be me being my healthy self. And we have to remember, and this is what Donna reminds me of, these people's hearts are frozen and they can be defrosted, but it's from a place of harm. These people the hurt people thing is so true. How fucked do you have to be to engage in that, And so I guess the healthiest thing I can do is try and put as much love into the first 7 years of a boy's life, try and encourage them, show them that they're great and that they love themselves and they don't need to take anything from another person because they have it all in themselves. That feels like probably the most rational response to the fact that there are men right now who think like that because they hate themselves.
I think that's a fantastic response, but I'm also probably guilty of trying to nudge you towards a compliment to pay yourself that is perhaps too much. But I think the journey you describe in your book is one of a man who acted out on pain without knowing that's what he was doing and confronted where that pain came from and found healthy ways to manage it and to move beyond it into a place where he's able to have very honest, very healthy, very upfront relationships with people.
Yeah.
And that's a process that heals people, however it is they're acting out, whether it's drugs, whether it's, workaholics, whether it's abusive behavior, whether it's violence. All of those things are running away from pain in a way, in the moment or over a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess just to pick up on something you said earlier too, I'm glad you picked up on the good bad thing, because I do wonder if what we're seeing, especially politically, is as a result of the other side of the coin, people convinced of their own goodness and then pointing, restricting based off of the idea that they themselves are right and good. And sometimes they are. Often they are, rationally. But is that a way to create connection and unity? I don't know. And I genuinely am quite scared of people who believe themselves to be wholly good people. That genuinely scares me. I don't know that feeling. I don't know that.
Well, Jordan Stephens, that was a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for joining me. And that. Jordan's book, Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs, or if you're reading on the spine, ADHD.
Initialism.
Initialism.
Thank you.
Or
ADHD.
If it's
I do call it
an
ADHD
acronym.
sometimes.
Do you? Well,
Yeah.
that's an acronym. It's available now, so do check that out. And also join us on Thursday for Jordan's gratitude list. Jordan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there you go. That was a very wide-ranging chat with Jordan Stephens, and I was really grateful for how he was willing to talk about stuff which it's probably easier not to chat about for fear of saying the wrong thing or being misinterpreted. So when we were talking about relationships and masculinity and the culture around male behaviour, I thought that was really generous of him to sort of answer every question I put to him, some of which were quite tricky. And there'll be more from Jordan in our bonus episode, The Gratitude List, which will be on your feeds on Thursday. He'll be sharing 5 things he's currently grateful for. And Jordan's book, Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs, is available on Audible. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email us hello@howdoyoukopepod.com. And you can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at howdoyoukopepod. Bye-bye. Follow How Do You Cope on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at wondery.com/survey. From Wondery, this is How Do You Cope, hosted by me, John Robbins. For Audio Always, our producers are Michael Dale and Bertie Moores. Executive producers are Ailsa Rochester and Dave Masterman. For Wondery, our producer is Emanuela Quenorte Francis, and our senior managing producer is Rachel Sibley. Executive producers are Michelle Martin, Chris Bourne, Morgan Jones and Marshall Louis.